We embrace all voices.
With honest and civilised conversation.
We're not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
The national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, the comedy panel show that's just like the news, in that the left fights the right and it doesn't really seem to matter who wins. We cover the big stories. It was in fact a troop of baboons and not angry vegans.
I like that.
And the really important stories.
Fat naked cow gets stuck in swimming pool.
It's a headline in a lot of local newspapers. Yeah.
We're on the same team, Nick. Yeah, but I'm just helping you.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, Saturday nights, 8 o'clock on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Very good afternoon and welcome to the Briefing PM, an hour of the latest political news, debate and analysis here on GB News. I'm Darren McCaffrey and here's what's coming up for you over the next hour. The Prime Minister has faced MPs for the first time since the vote of confidence vote on Monday. We'll be analysing how the Prime Minister dealt with questionings from the Leader of the Opposition, Keir Starmer. Angela Merkel's been forced to defend her ties with Russia while she was Chancellor of Germany. Last night she spoke for the first time since stepping down, as Olaf Scholz, the new Chancellor, made the claim that Germany has done more to help Ukraine than Britain has. Is he right? And the RMT union have threatened one of the most disruptive three-day transport strikes in at least a generation. We'll be speaking to someone who's in favour of that action. What do you think? And in a bid to save his premiership, the Prime Minister has been urged to cut taxes. But Number 10 reportedly reluctant to do this anytime soon. But frankly, is it what the government should be doing? As always, also get in touch with your views. You can email me at gbviews@gbnews.uk or tweet me at gbnews. That and so much more over the next hour between now and 4 p.m. But first, at the top of the hour, here's the latest news with Rosie.
A very good afternoon to you. It's a couple of minutes past 3. I'm Rosie Wright, keeping you up to date on GB News. The Prime Minister told MPs he's getting on with his job as he faced the Commons for the first time since surviving Monday's confidence vote in his leadership. Now, although Mr Johnson won the vote, 40% of his own party said they had no confidence in his leadership. The vote was prompted by the Sue Gray report into lockdown parties, but MPs are also unhappy with legislation to override the Northern Ireland Protocol and high taxation. The Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer, challenged Boris Johnson on the NHS, adding that when the Prime Minister falls short, he changes the rules and lowers the bar.
Pretending no rules were broken didn't work. Pretending the economy is booming didn't work. And pretending to build 40 new hospitals won't work either. They want him to change, but he can't.
But what we're doing more fundamentally is doing what the people of this country can see is simple common sense, and that is using our economic strength to invest in doctors and nurses and get people on the wards, get people giving people their scans and their screens and their tests in a more timely manner, and taking our NHS forward.
The Prime Minister has labelled the RMT rail strikes that are due to happen later this month as reckless and unwanted. Talks between Network Rail and the RMT union will be held to try and avert thousands of railway workers walking out on the 21st, 23rd and 25th of this month over potential job cuts and pay freezes. The union's calling it the biggest strike on the railway since 1989. Well, the planned strikes will cause significant disruption and will coincide with the Glastonbury Festival and Test match cricket. The Independent's travel editor, Simon Calder, says the dispute is between the unions and the government.
The union is betting that, yes, they can shut down the country. The government is thinking, hang on, we've probably got enough people who we can rely on, and people, of course, not needing to commute in the same numbers as they did before. We are probably going to see not a fully effective strike. So I think the first 3 days of strikes are going to go ahead, and then there will be some talks after that. But I'm kind of bedding in for a long summer of discontent, I'm afraid.
Now, a developing story. In Berlin, at least one person's been killed and 5 others have life-threatening injuries after a vehicle drove into a crowd in the west of the capital. Well, we can bring you live pictures now from Berlin. There are still many emergency service personnel on the ground, and we can see people walking and surveying the scene, for those of you who are listening on the radio. Well, Germany's Bild newspaper have identified the victim as a teacher who was in the street with a group of her school children. The driver has been identified now as a 29-year-old German Armenian who's been detained. At this point, the motive is unclear. German police say more than a dozen people were injured.
The man was taken in immediately and is currently in our custody. We are now trying to reconstruct the crime, meaning our traffic accident commando is here. We have investigators here who are looking at the evidence, who talk to witnesses, and we are questioning the suspect.
The actor John Barrowman happened to be in the area at the time. Well, he posted a video on Twitter to describe what he saw.
The car came down onto the pavement, then has come onto the road over there, has hit somebody, then has gone down the road and come back onto the pavement down that way, and come back onto the pavement and gone through a bunch of people, gone through the photograph that I posted of a cafe, and then right into a storefront window. I heard the bang and the crash when we were in a store, and then we came out and we just saw the carnage.
It's a developing story, and we'll keep you up to date here on GB News. Now, the UK's Crown Prosecution Service has authorised indecent assault charges against the film producer Harvey Weinstein. The 70-year-old faces 2 counts of indecent assault against a woman dating back to August 1996. It follows a review of evidence gathered during a Metropolitan Police investigation. The Labour MP Afzal Khan has warned cancelled holidays because of a backlog in passport applications could cost £1 billion this summer. During Prime Minister's questions, he challenged the Prime Minister to do more to reduce the delays.
2 weeks ago, the Prime Minister told the House, to the best of my knowledge, everybody is getting their passport within 4 to 6 weeks. However, the Passport Office is currently quoting a 10-week service time, with many of my constituents waiting well over that period.
And 91% are getting their passport within 6 weeks, I can tell him, Mr. Speaker. And we are putting hundreds and hundreds more staff into the Passport Office.
You're now up to date on GB News, and I'll bring you more as it happens. Now let's head back to the briefing with Darren.
Thank you very much indeed, Rosie. It is 7 minutes past 3 o'clock on this Wednesday afternoon. We're on TV, online and on your DAB digital radio. Thank you very much indeed for your company. Well, in the last couple of hours, the Prime Minister has faced MPs for the first time since he narrowly won that vote of no confidence against him on Monday night. The Prime Minister faced questions on the government's handling of the NHS backlog, with the Leader of the Opposition stating that the government had not had enough faith restored in the NHS post the pandemic. Well, let's go live now to Westminster and get the latest from our GB News political correspondent, Tom Harwood, who is there for us. Tom, as always, good afternoon. Thank you. Just first of all, on this issue of Keir Starmer attacking or going at the Prime Minister, I should say, on the National Health Service, not on the vote of no confidence, causing a few raised eyebrows.
Certainly. Now, I think the first thing to say here is that Keir Starmer probably made a wise move in terms of not going on that vote of no confidence as all of 6 of his questions. It would have looked pretty introspective, and of course everyone knows what has gone on with regards to that vote on Monday. I think what's raised most eyebrows in regards to the Leader of the Opposition's conduct during Prime Minister's questions is that he went instead on healthcare. Now, healthcare is the issue that the government has been wanting people to talk about for the whole of this week. It's the issue on which the Tuesday's cabinet was predicated, how the NHS is being modernised, the tens of billions of pounds that have been pumped into the service since the Prime Minister got into number 10. So it was very odd for the leader of the Labour Party to push forward on this topic for which the Prime Minister had so many talking points, whether it was more investment, more doctors, more nurses. He had the stats before him. It seemed like Keir Starmer was put a little bit on the back foot through this avenue of questioning. It's odd because there were many other things that the Labour leader could have gone on, most notably perhaps the cost of living crisis, the price of fuel, the price of energy, the price of food, all of these issues that really do matter to people up and down the country. That's not to say that health doesn't matter, of course, but the government perhaps has more answers and a stronger track record on having done extra things about health, not least raising taxes to put more money into the NHS budget, as they've controversially done over the last few months. So no, it was an interesting avenue for the Labour leader to have gone down, and to some extent it has put the Labour leader a little bit on the back foot. Commentators from across the political spectrum were raising their eyebrows after those 6 questions from the leader of the Labour Party. Perhaps a stronger avenue, as I say, would have been kick off on the big issue of the confidence of his own party in the Prime Minister, but then move on to the cost of living. Not having a single question on the confidence of his own party in the Prime Minister, and then sticking on the talking points that the Prime Minister really wants everyone to talk about, seemed curious.
Indeed, but maybe he's also got the SNP to pick up on that, hasn't he, Tom? But in saying that, you could irk Conservative backbenchers, couldn't you, by talking about the economy, not just that OECD prediction today that suggests that we're looking at stagnant growth next year, but also this big debate within the party now about how to deal with the cost of living crisis and fundamentally on tax cuts. How much pressure is the Prime Minister under now to cut taxes and to cut them pretty damn soon?
He's under enormous pressure. It wasn't just his former cabinet colleague Lord Frost who yesterday came out to say that the national insurance rise should be completely reversed, not just the threshold raised, and indeed the corporation tax rises set to come in next year be abandoned. Actually, many backbenchers of the party in the Commons have been saying this, and we are expecting various announcements now from the Prime Minister on the cost of living and on the economy. We're expecting a speech tomorrow that may cover issues from housing to childcare, and we're expecting a further speech potentially at the start of next week on the economy and on the economic vision of this government. Because looking back to Monday, it wasn't just a vote there from 148 Conservative MPs on parties or beer or wine or cake. This was a vote about a general sense of malaise with the government. This was a vote that perhaps was triggered by Partygate. But I don't think you would have got those numbers if it was Partygate alone. Clearly, many people from across the spectrum of the Conservative Party have had misgivings about how many U-turns this government has performed, how high spending, high taxing it has become, how frankly, in many areas, unconservative it has become. And the Prime Minister could well be thinking about how is he going to win over not every single Conservative MP who voted against him on Monday, but a significant chunk of them. And perhaps looking to those Steve Bakers and Mark Harpers, those figures who have been highly critical of this government, but critical from a Conservative direction. Perhaps a way to win back their trust, or indeed their confidence, is by pursuing a Conservative growth agenda. That's an an agenda of tax cuts and an agenda of deregulation. We don't have long to wait to hear exactly what the government is planning in these areas. And of course, we're expecting within the next day or so the government's plans to be announced with regard to the legislation they'll lay down to fix the Northern Ireland Protocol 2. These do, in many areas, look like the government is trying to earn the trust of their own backbenchers, and potentially what we're in for is a greater sense of conservatism from this government.
Well, we shall wait and see. Tom Harwood, as always, thank you very much indeed for joining us there from Westminster. Well, let's go from Tom Harwood to Tom Hunt. He's the Conservative MP for Ipswich and joins us down the line from Parliament. Tom, good afternoon to you. Just picking up on what Tom Harwood was saying there, do you think the government has been conservative enough over the last 2 to 3 years?
I think in some respects, I think it has. In other respects, I think it could maybe go further. I think, tax cuts is one area where it could go further. Mind you, I was very happy with the Rwanda partnership, and that was announced a few months ago. I think more action on immigration is going to be important to demonstrate Conservative credentials, as is a tax-cutting agenda. And I'm pleased to have heard that that's something we might be moving closer to over the last few days.
But in saying that, isn't that the problem, though, Tom? We've had the cost of living crisis now for 9 months or so. The government's initial offering clearly wasn't good enough. It got dragged back again with somewhat of an emergency budget. Many MPs think that's not good enough either. They want more. And isn't that the problem, though, that the government seem to be reacting to events? They don't seem to have a vision of how to really properly deal with this.
Well, I don't think reacting to events is necessarily something I'd see as a bad thing. I think the events we're talking about are incredibly challenging and fluid. And that is, very significant global inflation rates, very challenging economic outlook across the world. We have the challenge, of course, of wanting to do what we can to shield some of those on the lowest income from spiralling costs. But as we've seen today from the OECD report, there's also a significant challenge when it comes to promoting economic growth. When we think about the interventions we might want to make, we also don't want to make the situation of inflation any worse. So it's an incredibly challenging situation. Inevitably, the government will have to be nimble, quick on its feet, and respond to events. I don't see that as a negative, but as a strength.
But isn't there a problem here with economic growth in the sense that, Britain's economic growth, its productivity's not been great for the past decade. Britain was, I think, the slowest country to recover, or major economy to recover from the pandemic, to get back to the same level of economic growth that it was beforehand. And now we hear from the OECD saying that we could be just above Russia next year. Why can't the Conservative government, not just this one, but the ones over the last decade or so, why have they not been able to grow Britain's economy?
Well, I think at various points throughout the pandemic, our economy has been growing strongly and favourably compared with other countries. I think that one of the things that report highlighted was that we are exposed to what's going on in the Ukraine, and that is having a very negative impact on our economy at the moment. But when we look over the last year or two, there's been numerous forecasts that have been published about economic growth. Sometimes we've been doing well compared to other countries. This particular one, we're doing bad compared to other countries. I'd also say that economic forecasts quite often have a habit of being wrong. So what we do know, though, forecasts aside, is that the picture is very challenging. It is very challenging. But I do believe that the Conservative government we have at the moment is by far our best bet of getting through that difficult time. And the Chancellor wrote a piece today, I read in the Telegraph, which I thought was encouraging. But it is a very challenging outlook. And as always, my principal concern are my constituents, many of whom are struggling with cost of living at the moment.
OK, let's pause for a moment if we can, Tom, and let's look back a little bit at PMQs because it was on the NHS that Keir Starmer focused on. Let's have a look at the exchanges between the two leaders.
Speaker, pretending no rules for Prime Minister, he chunters on. Pretending no rules were broken didn't work. Pretending the economy is booming didn't work. And pretending to build 40 new hospitals won't work either. They want him to change, but he can't. As always with this Prime Minister, when he's falling short, he just changes the rules and lowers the bar. In March, he proposed changing the NHS contract. He wants to double the length of time patients can be made to wait for surgery, from 1 year to 2 years. On top of that, he scrapped zero tolerance of 12-hour waits at A&E. 24 hours at A&E used to be a TV programme. Now it's his policy. Speaker, I bet they wish they were this organised on Monday. Well, Mr. Speaker, it's Health Week, and he's telling them he's going to turn over a new leaf. So why doesn't he start by scrapping his plans to greenlight wanting and inadequate NHS standards?
Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, look, I've got to tell him, I just think that this line of attack is not working. We've not only raised the standards in the NHS, we're not only reducing waiting times for those who've had to wait the longest, Mr. Speaker, but what we're doing more fundamentally is doing what the people of this country can see is simple common sense, and that is using our economic strength to invest in doctors and nurses and get people on the wards, get people, giving people their scans and their screens and their tests in a more timely manner, and taking our NHS forward.
So, Tom, in reality, in many ways, the Conservative Party have got a good story to tell on the National Health Service, but the problem is the service is struggling and it's not likely to get substantially better any time soon. That's going to harm you, isn't it, at the next election? Because essentially, people might hear about the money being pumped in, they might hear about the extra nurses, but their experience is going to be pretty difficult for the coming years.
Yeah, I mean, we all know, that the NHS and hospitals and each of our constituencies, we know, are under significant pressure. All MPs, including me, have got constituents who have had to wait far longer than they would have liked to have waited for hip and knee operations and you name it. And clearly, that is a major challenge. I mean, COVID in particular has exacerbated that enormously. It's put a huge pressure on the system, and we are, as a consequence of that, we do have very large waiting lists, which is, regardless of your view about the increase in the national insurance and the health and social care levy. We have got different views about whether that's the right thing to do or not, or the right way of raising the money to put into the NHS, the £12 billion extra we're going to be putting in to tackle this very issue that was highlighted at PMQs. At the end of the day, you can criticise that method of funding it, but it is a method, it is a plan to fund and to address those waiting lists. The Labour Party have no plan, they have no plan of their own for how they would actually raise that additional money to tackle the waiting list. So yes, I was slightly surprised that the Labour Party decided to focus on this issue in the way that they did. But I do think actually that many of my constituents realise that there is going to be a consequence of the lockdowns we've seen as a consequence of the pandemic. And this is one of those. But it's an enormous challenge for a government, which is why, and not everyone's agreed with it, they've introduced the new health and social care levy as a way of funding the additional investment that's going to be necessary to tackle this challenge.
OK, and just very finally, and in one word if you can, Tom, what do you think about this idea of changing the 1922 committee's rules that the Prime Minister could be challenged in the next year or so? Do you think it's outrageous or it's democratic?
To be honest with you, I haven't given a huge amount of thought to it. I mean, we had a vote earlier this week, which the Prime Minister won, but clearly he's got a big challenge on his hands to reach out to those 148 who did vote a different way. We want to have a united parliamentary party, and though the Prime Minister won, the result, was perhaps closer than a lot of people would have liked. So he has got a big challenge on his hands, and the next few months will be crucial. I haven't given a huge amount of thought to the 1922 committee rules, but we do know though that the Prime Minister won the vote, but we also know that there's a job to do to ensure that we can go forward together as one united parliamentary party, which of course is when we're always at our best.
OK, Tom. As always, thank you very much indeed. Tom Hunt there, the Conservative MP for Ipswich, joining us down the line. You're watching GB News. Coming up in just a couple of minutes, we're going to talk about Angela Merkel, Germany and Ukraine, but also talking about those train strikes. We're going to be hearing from someone who's in favour of the union's action. That and much more in just a couple of minutes. Stay tuned.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV,
on radio, on digital.
Absolutely everywhere. We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices.
With honest and civilised conversation.
We're not part of the establishment.
We're one of you. And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
And the national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Join us for Ministry of Defence, the comedy panel show that's just like the news, in that the left fights the right and it doesn't really seem to matter who wins. We cover the big stories. It was in fact a troop of baboons and not angry vegans.
I like that.
And the really important stories.
Fat naked cow gets stuck in swimming pool.
It's a headline in a lot of local newspapers. Yeah.
We're on the same team, Nick. Yeah, but I'm just helping you.
Join us for Ministry of Defence, Saturday nights, 8 o'clock on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debates, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
Hello, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
Make sure that you join us Monday to Thursday, 10 a.m. until midday, right here on GB News for To The Point.
We're not afraid to talk about the topics that matter to you or the big topics that always matter.
We cover absolutely everything, from the breaking political stories of the day to law and order, what's going on in the channel. We're not afraid to hold people to account.
We always make sure we include your views on our show.
Indeed, if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we're saying it. So make sure you join the conversation with us, 10 a.m. until midday, Monday to Thursday, for To The Point on GB News.
Very welcome back to GB News and The Briefing. Now, in her first major interview since leaving office, the former Chancellor Angela Merkel has defended her record on handling Russian President Vladimir Putin. Mrs Merkel said that she had nothing to apologise for over her response to Russia's annexation of Crimea in 2014 when sanctions were imposed on Russia. And she also justified defending her opposition in office to Ukraine joining NATO. Well, joining me now from Brussels is the journalist Jack Parrick. Good afternoon to you, Jack. Lots of criticism, hasn't there, been of Angela Merkel since she's left office, not least of all also on this idea of Germany's dependency on Russian oil and gas, but she's been defending herself.
She has. She says, I don't blame myself at all for what she did. She was sort of defending her entire legacy here, actually, at this first public speech since she left office as Chancellor back in December. She essentially said that the decisions she made were reasonable at the time, that she understood that a lot of the issues that she was going through related to the Russians, that in her sense, that she was doing the right thing. And that included defending taking on Russian gas and making Germany so dependent on it. And also the decision by her government in 2008 to block the Ukraine accession process, this sort of agreement. It was called the Membership Accession Plan for Ukraine to join NATO as a military, the NATO military alliance. She said that Russia would have seen that as a direct threat and as basically a declaration of war. She did, however, concede that during this speech in Berlin last night, that she had failed to create enough of a security architecture for the German military to be able to support Ukraine now. And she accepted that there was a failure on her part to do that. The German army has been chronically underfunded for a number of decades now, but any German government until this point has struggled to push money into it, obviously, since the Second World War.
It is fascinating, Jack, isn't it, when we look at the reaction of kind of different countries to all of this. We know Angela Merkel obviously brought up in East Germany, spoke Russian. had not a great relationship with Vladimir Putin, but at the same time, we've heard from Emmanuel Macron in recent days and weeks saying that Russia shouldn't be humiliated. It is in a contrast to the position the UK politics is taking. Why is that? Can you explain why, in some ways, other Western European countries seem a little bit more, maybe not forgiving, but understanding of Russia?
Well, I think firstly, when it comes to Merkel, as you say, she was brought up in East Germany. She is a fluent Russian speaker, which meant she had that sort of direct contact, some sort of personal, at least direct connection with Vladimir Putin that many other leaders probably can't say that they have. She would probably argue that she understands him a little bit more than anyone else. Now, it's also important to note, Volodymyr Zelensky, the Ukrainian president, hasn't only been heavily critical of her, but also the former French president back then, Nicolas Sarkozy, who also was reluctant to allow Ukraine to join NATO. Now, as far as what you're saying about Emmanuel Macron, this is a hard read. He's been really, really heavily criticized for that. The suggestion that, not humiliating a Russian president whose troops are committing war crimes in a friendly neighbour to a European country has been a pretty difficult thing for him to try and defend. He's been panned across the European Union. But I think what he feels is that he wants to find a negotiated way out of this. And that's also sort of a legacy of Merkel as well, with the Minsk agreements after the annexation of Crimea. The attempt to end the conflict in that way was something that he was involved in. And I think that's what he's saying, is that he really wants to try and get back to the diplomatic table. But again, he's been heavily criticised for those comments.
And just very finally, Jack, we've also heard from Olaf Scholz, who's of course the new German Chancellor as well, suggesting that Germany is doing an awful lot. Kind of hinting at they're doing more than almost anyone else in Western Europe, including the UK. That doesn't seem like the view from here. In fact, I don't think even inside Germany, he's been widely criticised, hasn't he, for his response to the Ukraine crisis.
Yeah, and it's been really, really difficult for him and his government to get over the line any sending of any real heavy weapons to Ukraine. The Ukrainian president has been really condemned the German government for their position on that. As you say, Olaf Scholz has come out and said that they're doing everything they can. They believe that they're supporting Ukraine a lot. But really, what the Ukrainian government, if you listen to the foreign minister, Dmytro Kuleba, every trip he goes on to every country, all he asks and all he demands is weapons to defend. They say, the Ukrainians have been saying, listen, we'll lose our lives for you. Just give us the weapons to fight the Russians on our territory. And so the Ukrainians, as we said, have been pretty critical of that German position. The Germans say that they're doing more, though, and I think there are plans in the Chancellor-Amt in Berlin to maybe up a little bit more of the weapons deliveries.
OK. Jack, as always, thank you very much indeed for your analysis this afternoon. Jack Barrack there joining us down the line from Brussels. Thank you, Jack. By the way, do get in touch, gbviews at gbnews.uk, or tweet me at gbnews. Coming up in a couple of minutes, we'll talk about those rail strikes, someone who's in favour of the union action, and also, should the government be cutting tax and cutting it now? We'll be finding out. And talking about that in just a couple of minutes. But first, just after 3:30, is the latest news headlines again with Rosie White.
It's 3:32. I'm Rosie Wright, keeping you up to date on GB News. The Prime Minister told MPs he's getting on with his job as he faced the Commons for the first time since surviving Monday's confidence vote in his leadership. The Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer, challenged Boris Johnson on the NHS, adding that when the Prime Minister falls short, he changes the rules and lowers the bar.
Pretending no rules were broken didn't work. Pretending the economy is booming didn't work. And pretending to build 40 new hospitals won't work either. They want him to change, but he can't.
But what we're doing more fundamentally is doing what the people of this country can see is simple common sense, and that is using our economic strength to invest in doctors and nurses and get people on the wards, get people, giving people their scans and their screens and their tests in a more timely manner, and taking our NHS forward.
The Prime Minister has labelled the RMT rail strikes due to happen later this month as reckless and unwanted. Talks between Network Rail and the RMT union will be held to try and avert thousands of railway workers walking out on the 21st, 23rd and 25th of this month over potential job cuts and pay freezes. A developing story for you now. In Berlin, at least one person's been killed. 5 others have been left with life-threatening injuries after a vehicle drove into a crowd in the west of the capital. Well, Germany's Bild newspaper has identified the victim as a teacher who was in the street with a group of her schoolchildren. The driver has been identified as a 29-year-old German Armenian who's been detained by police. At this point, the motive is unclear. German police say more than a dozen people were injured. The UK's Crown Prosecution Service has authorised indecent assault charges against Hollywood film producer Harvey Weinstein. The 70-year-old faces 2 counts of indecent assault against a woman between July and August 1996. The decision follows a review of evidence gathered during a Metropolitan Police investigation. The force say the woman is now in her 50s. TV online and DAB+ radio, this is GB News. Shortly, we'll be back to the briefing with Darren.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV, on radio, on digital.
Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices.
With honest and civilised conversation.
We're not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
And the national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Join us for Ministry of Defence, the comedy panel show that's just like the news, in that the left fights the right and it doesn't really seem to matter who wins. We cover the big stories. It was in fact a troop of baboons and not angry vegans.
I like that.
And the really important stories.
Fat naked cow gets stuck in swimming pool.
It's a headline in a lot of local newspapers. Yeah.
We're on the same team, Nick. Yeah, but I'm just helping you.
Join us for Ministry of Defence, Saturday nights, 8 o'clock on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Very welcome back to GB News. It is 24 minutes to 4 o'clock. You're watching the briefing. Thank you for joining us on this Wednesday afternoon. We're on TV, online and on your DAB digital radio. Now, over 50,000 railway workers are about to walk out, at the end of the month, in the UK's rail network on the 21st, 23rd and 25th of June. It's going to be the biggest industrial action for more than 3 decades. And the rail strikes could cost taxpayers as much as £100 million in lost fare revenue, as well as, of course, having an impact on the wider economy from the shutdown of the network. Number 10, I've branded it as selfish and thoroughly irresponsible. Let's speak to Peter Edwards. He's the former editor of Labour List and joins us down the line. Peter, good afternoon to you. Selfish and irresponsible.
Well, I wouldn't say that at all. You know, if you work on the railways and you're facing a pay freeze and inflation at 10 or 11%, that's effectively a pay cut. So I think it's actually reasonable to put it on the table, industrial action. Now, industrial action may not go ahead. How many times have we woken up to strikes being cancelled in the morning because there's an agreement? But if trade union leaders are putting a strike on the table, it shows how badly negotiations have gone and perhaps a loss of faith in Grant Shapps, the Transport Secretary.
But as far as I can work out, Peter, the RMT want an 11% pay rise, which is at the moment certainly above where inflation's at, and they don't want to see job cuts on a network where, whether we like it or not, is seeing fewer passengers.
well, fewer passengers, but should we compromise on safety? According to one estimate, Network Rail that runs the infrastructure is going to cut 2,500 jobs. Now, whether a train is full or 50% empty, you still want that train to be safe. So I'd be very concerned about job cuts in maintenance if it is as high as 2,000. And then bear in mind these figures about pay rises. If a pay rise only matches inflation, you're no better off. That's a real terms pay freeze, and that's the basic law of economics.
But isn't the problem though, Peter? Is I think the Governor of the Bank of England pointed out, maybe understandably on an individual, personal basis, but if everyone gets a pay rise, it just pushes up inflation even more. It becomes an endless cycle, doesn't it?
Well, I thought you might ask about that. And Andrew Bailey, the governor, did say that, and it's literally, I think, making an academic point in the sense of if pay rises at a time of high inflation match that inflation, then it could drive up prices further. So, according to economics, which I studied a bit, that is true. But what use is that to a mum or a dad trying to pay their mortgage, work on the railways, raise their children, and dream of sending their kids to university one day?
Well, but the whole point is you just end up making it worse. It's not necessarily something. But the wider point is that actually, aren't you shooting yourself in the foot? Some would argue the RMT shooting themselves in the foot, in the sense that if train services become unreliable, if these strikes prolong and keep going on, people will just switch. They'll switch to other modes of transport, probably most notably back to getting into their car.
Well, no, I don't think so, because petrol prices are rising and getting the train is cleaner and greener. But I also want to go back to your previous point about inflation, because cost of living crises do not come out of nowhere. They're not a force majeure. It's because the government doesn't invest in energy infrastructure, so we get more expensive gas from abroad. Or it's because the government doesn't invest in an adequate public transport network. Public transport becomes stretched and fares rise, and so on and so on. It's the same with agriculture, and we're reliant on Ukraine for grain. And of course, there's a whole tragedy in Ukraine right now. But cost of living crises and inflation don't come out of nowhere. They come out of government policy failure. And I'm afraid that's what we're seeing today.
Maybe so, but maybe the solution isn't essentially at the moment an inflation-busting pay rise. But we will wait and see, and we will get you back on, Peter, again, and we'll find out.
But it's not inflation-busting.
Well, if it's 11% in inflation at the moment, I mean, the estimates at the moment are that inflation might well hit 10% this year. 11% to me is higher than 10%.
Well, there's one estimate that it's going to hit 10%, one estimate that it's going to hit 11.1. Either way, it's broadly on a level with inflation. And I know you've got another slot to go to, but bear in mind, poor old nurses, the heroes and heroines of the pandemic, had a 3% pay rise, and inflation is at 10.
Indeed, and on the whole, nurses.
That's what I say to the government.
Yeah, and on the whole, nurses actually earn a hell of a lot less than your average train driver. And you might suggest that they're more important to us than. What I'm trying to say is that clearly everyone's under pressure at the moment. But not everyone's going on strike. But we will see how this pans out, and I'm sure people have got a view on this. Peter, we do have to move on. Thank you very much. GBviews at gbnews.uk. And just to add to that, actually, while I was talking to Peter, members of the Unite Union are saying that they're going to go on strike as well on the 21st of June. That will, of course, affect the tube and railways in and around London. So that is that members of Unite, Transport for London and London Underground are also going to go strike on that June 21st, so making it a pretty comprehensive strike at the moment. But as Peter says, the negotiations continue. We'll have to see how it plays out. Well, let's kind of stay with the cost of living crisis now, because Boris Johnson is coming under pressure from his MPs to cut taxes after surviving that vote of confidence. The Prime Minister's supporters believe the move would help rebuild unity in the Conservative Party and also help people cope with the cost of living crisis. Well, let's speak to Daniela Boxall. She is the media manager at the Taxpayers Alliance, is in the studio with us. Good afternoon to you. Tax cuts, why are they a good idea when, frankly, the deficit's growing and our borrowing costs are growing? Surely the government could do with more money, not less.
Well, thank you for having me on the show to start off, Darren. And yeah, you're all right. The deficit is growing. Obviously, inflation is putting a massive strain on government debt payments. I think they're now about the fourth biggest area of government spending. So they're about the same size as, a whole department of government. So yeah, it is a massive strain on government at the moment. But of course, it's also a massive strain on people at home as well. And the government's got to balance about whether, they're going to be helping people during a cost of living crisis. And we're of the opinion, and I think lots of other people are of the opinion, virtually everybody is, Labour Party to the Cabinet themselves, they've all been calling for tax cuts recently. So everybody seems to be in agreement that, you know, tax cuts are the way to help people in this cost of living crisis. But it seems like the only way we're going to get this is through a sort of leadership challenge or some kind of, you know, lack of confidence in Boris Johnson's leadership.
No, I'm not an economist, but I thought the basics of kind of trying to get inflation under control is not necessarily giving people more money. That can make things worse. Many people say that the only way you can get inflation under control is through some economic pain, and that economic pain, frankly, means possibly cutting public spending and also raising taxes, not cutting taxes. As difficult as that is for individuals, that is the easiest and most effective way of getting inflation under control.
Yeah, of course. And you mentioned one method that the government could be doing, which is getting government spending under control. And we've got no signs so far that the government is looking to do that. So I think what we'd like to see is the government actually, you know, reining in some of their spending, tackling the huge amounts of waste that the public sector goes through every single year. We found, you know, £5.6 billion just in our small little team at the TPA in one single year. So imagine how much the government could save if they, you know, really cracked down on waste and actually went for a massive drive.
But isn't the truth, though, that Boris Johnson's not a friend of the Taxpayers Alliance? Boris Johnson, he quite likes spending money.
Yeah, of course, and it was a very popular policy for him in 2019, but going ahead, I don't know if it's going to be a massively popular policy. You know, when we're seeing families facing a £1 million tax bill in their lifetime, that is a huge amount of money that they're not going to be able to spend, you know, on their kids' university education, as you mentioned in your previous interview. You know, all the things that people want to be spending money on, you know, whether that's a house, a holiday, you know, even small things like that. So there is a lot that the government could be doing that they're not doing to help people with the cost of living.
Who would you like to then see take over? If it's not going to be Boris Johnson, he's not going to be your tax-cutting Prime Minister. We'll have to wait and see. There are suggestions he might go down that path. But if not, who is it? I mean, there was much talk about Jeremy Hunt being Chancellor today. I don't think that's going to happen. But is there someone that you look at and you see on the wings of the Conservative Party who might be a bit more Taxpayer Alliance friendly? Well,
it doesn't matter to us whether it's a Conservative in power or Labour Party in power, as long as the government of the day is doing what's right for people. And what we think that is, you know, having a low, stable tax environment that encourages growth, that encourages jobs, that encourages, you know, what we should all want from our economy, which is, you know, a stable, healthy, growing economy. And it doesn't really matter who's in power. It's just as long as they're delivering that, then they would be a friend of the TPA.
OK, Danielle, thank you very much indeed. Daniela Boxall there, joining us from the Taxpayers Alliance. Thank you very much indeed. Let's move on to a very different story, because this year marks 30 years since diplomatic relations between the UK and Azerbaijan kind of got on a even keel. The UK was the first major investor in the post-Soviet space, with BP's contract at the time called the contract of the century in Azerbaijan to try and connect Europe to Azerbaijan's gas and oil reserves. But at the same time, Azerbaijan has been trying to extricate itself from Russian influence following the collapse of the Soviet Union, and it has remained economically independent to a large degree, unlike many other of the satellite states around Russia. Well, joining me now, I'd like to say, is Azerbaijan's ambassador to the UK. That is Elaine Suleimanov. Elaine, thank you very much indeed for joining us. So 30 years of diplomatic relations. How do you reckon it's going?
Thank you. Good afternoon. It's going actually quite well. And as you mentioned, UK is the largest foreign investor in Azerbaijan. In fact, there are more than 600 UK companies working in Azerbaijan. Of course, the lead is the BP, but not just BP. There are other companies as well. In urban planning, in construction, in other areas. And I think we see UK as a major positive presence in the region, and we're working very well and very closely together. We have celebrated here at Lancaster House our 30 years of relationships, and there was a great celebration in Baku, Azerbaijan as well. And there was, by the way, exchange of letters, including from Prime Minister Johnson to President Aliyev, which was a very positive development as well.
Now, clearly one of those ties, the strong ties, are when it comes to oil and gas, and we know BP is still operating in Azerbaijan. What do you reckon about the situation that we all find ourselves in now in terms of Russia, Ukraine, with the cut-off from oil and gas? I mean, is Azerbaijan upping the amount of production? Is there ways that you can alleviate the crisis?
That's a very good question. And our partnership with BP actually has turned out to be visionary. Some people opposed it in early 1990s, but it turned out that the oil pipeline Baku-Tbilisi-Ceyhan, which provides significant contribution to energy security globally, and by the way, provides about 40% of Israel's annual oil consumption, which is by itself is significant. And the Southern Gas Corridor, which provides the only alternative supply of piped gas into the European markets, turned out to be a visionary project because now they help to ensure European energy security. Now, we, of course, can increase the production, but that's not a one-day conversation. It's a long-term solution. There needs to be investment. There needs to be a long-term commitment. It cannot be done overnight. We cannot increase or double the production within 1 year. There are resources. We can do that. But what we need is a clear approach from our European partners and a clear commitment to the future. Because, you know, we all want to see greener world. We all want to see cleaner world. And by the way, BP and other companies are now working on the green energy in Azerbaijan, including wind and solar and others. But the transformation and transition should happen realistically, not ideologically. And in order to happen realistically, we need gas.
Indeed, but there are also other concerns, aren't there, as well? You know, many in the West, many in this country view Azerbaijan as a dictatorship. I see that the US State Department accused Azerbaijan of unlawful and arbitrary killings, heavy restrictions on free press and the internet, the worst forms of child labour. This was a report 2 years ago from the US State Department. I mean, how do you answer those claims that Azerbaijan is effectively a pretty nasty dictatorship?
I think the reality is very different. We all could have our own opinion, but we strongly disagree with this kind of statements. In fact, the State Department, in its recent statements, have itself changed its tone. In fact, our National Security Advisor is today in Washington meeting with Jake Sullivan, the U.S. National Security Advisor, and the U.S. has been very positive reaching out to Azerbaijan. So I think, once again, these ideological statements which reflect much more domestic politics rather than reality on the ground are not always helpful. What we see now that the reality is very Azerbaijan is a very open, very tolerant state. I mean, we have established very much a tradition of the first Muslim republic with a predominantly Muslim population in the world. We have equal rights for women and men long before many others. We're a very open society in terms of inclusion of different religions and different cultures. We have Jewish community, which dates back about 2,500 years. We have Christian community. So I think this kind of statements, they reflect more of a political, domestic situation than a reality on the ground in Azerbaijan.
Okay. And Ambassador, just let me ask one last question. That is, of course, on Karabakh. It's a very disputed territory. There was a war between you and Armenia not that long ago. Is there any chance of peace?
In fact, there is a great chance for peace. It's not a disputed territory. It's a part of Azerbaijan according to every international law and according to the US and UK government. But what we're doing now, we're working closely with the Armenian side on normalization, opening the border, opening the communication lines. What we want to see in Armenia, we want to see a neighbor which is a part of an integrated region in which we all benefit. We wish well to the Armenian people. Yes, we have restored our territorial integrity according to international law, but our goal is not to harm the Armenian people, not to hurt Armenian economy. Our job and our goal now is to build a better region and normal relation with Armenia. I tell you, I hope that within a year or so, we could have a peace agreement, or at least the beginning of the peace agreement with Armenia, and I'm very hopeful for it.
Okay, Ambassador Elaine Suleimanov, thank you so much indeed for joining us down the line there from the embassy in central London. Thank you. OK, let's end the programme on taxation and fuel prices, because the RSC is warning motorists could face average prices of £2 per litre this summer amid rising oil prices. The Treasury, of course, had cut fuel duty by 5p back in March, but that seems to have had little impact on the forecourts, with a new record of 175.6 pence hit in recent days. Well, joining me now is Howard Cox from Fair Fuel UK. Why is fuel so high here? I mean, I've heard in recent days, you know, obviously taxation, it doesn't help. I think there's VAT on top of the tax. And sterling's taken a bit of a hit, so that's not helped.
Well, you've said all of the things that are right, but there's the other part of the equation. There's some serious opportunistic profiteering further up the fuel supply chain, and we don't know where that exactly is. It's not at the forecourts, and your viewers shouldn't be actually going to garages and shouting at the garage owners and say, "Why is my the cost of fuel so high?" It is further up the fuel supply chain. That's why the government have allowed, for some reason, for years and years and years, for the not to work out. When oil goes up, what is the price of diesel and petrol the following week? They don't tell us that. And your point is very valid. The 5p cut in fuel duty, which is in fact 6p with the VAT on top of it, it didn't touch the sides. And that's why we're calling for a 20p cut in fuel duty. And he's got to do it now and have a body called Pump Watch, which I'm working with MPs.
Any chance that's going to happen?
I'm working hard, Darren, on this, really, really hard, as you probably know. I've been doing this for 13 years, and we did get a freeze in duty in that time and a 5p cut. I'm getting a lot of support from backbench MPs. People like Robert Halfon and Craig McKinley are really fighting hard for a Pump Watch body.
But frankly, a lot of this is out of the government's control, isn't it? I mean, this is, petrol prices. I think there's record high petrol prices or gas prices in the United States at the moment. In Germany, it's higher than we pay here. This is not a unique problem to the UK.
I'm afraid I'd slightly disagree with you that. In terms of the taxation, half of what goes in the tank goes to the government, and there's the VAT on fuel duty itself as well on top of that. The government can do something about this and cut it. At the moment, we're still one of the highest taxed motorists in the world, so they could do that. And the other thing, there is opportunistic profiteering. Let me tell you that not so long ago, about 2 weeks ago, diesel was 9p less at the wholesale level, what garages pay to fill up their bulk tanks. And yet, at the pumps, in terms of retail, it was 12 pence more than petrol. Now, work that one out.
And I'm just finding, and I heard that in Northern Ireland, they've got something slightly different in that they've got this comparison that people can go on and find out in different parts of the country where the prices are cheaper, essentially.
Yeah, we've got some websites like that in this country, petrolprices.com, etc. There's lots of those sorts of things, but the government can do that much more. We could have this Pump Watch body, which actually would tell drivers, we could have a kite mark on every single sign in the forecourt, which says we adhere to fair pricing and transparency.
Do you fear, just finding quickly, £2 a litre some point this summer? Almost inevitable?
I think it's sooner than summer. I mean, we're in summer now, aren't we?
True, yeah.
And frankly, I would say in a month's time, even petrol might hit £2. It's really worrying, Darren.
Wow, it's going to be very tough for people.
Yeah.
Howard, thank you very much indeed. Howard Cox there from Fairfield, UK. Thank you very much indeed. OK, well, that is it from me on the briefing for this afternoon. We have got, of course, Tom back at 9:30 in the morning, Glory here at 12. And we'll have coverage of the Prime Minister's big speech tomorrow from 3 o'clock. Up next, though, it is Colin Brazier between 4 and 6 p.m. Stay tuned for that. But before all of that, let's bring you up to date with the weather across the country. Let's go to the Met Office down in Exeter. It's a pretty mixed bag, sunshine and showers. Have a nice afternoon. I'll see you tomorrow.
Hello again, I'm Aidan McGivern from the Met Office. Further showers, even some thunderstorms for many of us through the rest of the day, but brighter spells will develop in places and it will turn drier later on. However, low pressure is in charge at the moment, that low pressure sitting just to the north of Northern Ireland, and it has brought a weather front north across the UK. That's effectively stalled in central Scotland, and just to the south of that, with light winds, some slow-moving showers and thunderstorms could cause some issues for southern Scotland, northeast England. A yellow warning in force here. Showers elsewhere will move through more quickly and die away during the evening. By the end of the night, just some remnants